want to just cover this paragraph in the text. I think it's relevant. The frontal lobes have three regions. The motor cortex, sort of in the rear, as we discussed in that primary motor cortex, directs that fine motor movement that we just spoke of. The premotor cortex seems to be involved in planning such movements, and is involved with what neuroscientists call executive functioning, planning, making decisions, implementing strategies, inhibiting inappropriate behaviors, and using working memory to process information. Working memory is what it takes to, say, have a conversation. I have to bear in mind what the other person just said, or what it takes to do a math problem in your head. If you can imagine putting in parentheses 2 times 14, close parentheses, plus 1. So 2 times 14 in parentheses, plus 1. And what is that? Well, it's 29. I could take the 28 part first and then add 1, and that involves working memory. I got to do one thing at a time, hold it aloft, and add the 1. It takes a little bit of concentration to do that, just a hair, but your working memory is responsible for that, and our frontal lobes govern that. Our ability to do that relies on some degree of horsepower in that area. So damage to certain parts of the prefrontal cortex can result in changes in personality, mood, affect, and the ability to control inappropriate behavior. I've got a clip right there on D2L, Brightspace, that speaks about Bill, whose last name is not mentioned, and he looked to be in his late 30s back then, in 1984. He was a lawyer whose frontal lobe was impaired with a stroke. He had an aneurysm. What was his deficit as revealed with that stroke, and how does that differ from Phineas Gage? Well, Bill, as you'll see, had a subtle deficit, but he lost his planning ability. He was still in control of himself and overtly polite, really pleasant sounding guy, looking guy. But as you'll see, as he undergoes a few psychological tests, like the Tinker Toys, he doesn't do too well. He had not much of a plan going in. And that's something that may have been a result of this stroke. Now, some of you may have heard, I think I mentioned in chapter 1, Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad employee, age 25, in 1849. There was an explosion. A metal rod went into his cheekbone and out the top of his skull, essentially removing his frontal lobe in an unimaginably powerful explosion. He survived. He retained all his bodily functions. He walked to a hospital, but he began to show erratic behavior, and in some cases, especially by modern standards, criminal behavior. And what happened, this is the first implication that we had, the frontal lobe was responsible for that humanity. His intelligence as a railroad foreman was depleted. He couldn't perform that job anymore, and not only that, he was consistently getting in trouble. So a rather horrific case study, but nonetheless, that was the implication of his accident. Whereas Bill's situation was much subtler, but nonetheless significant. He could not act as a lawyer anymore, even though, as you'll see, he's well-spoken and gentle and decent and a lot of things, but nonetheless, he lost his capacity to make a living doing that.